Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you are new to the show, please smash that subscribe button. Also consider becoming a YouTube member, a Patreon, or donate small amount given in the link in the description box. But the least you could do is to watch this show, like, share, and comment. Without further ado, let me welcome our guest tonight, Professor Richard Wolff. Professor Wolff is one of the world's leading Marxist economists, a professor emeritus at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and the founder of Democracy at Work. He is widely known for his clear, accessible critiques of capitalism, US economic policy, and global inequality, and for making radical economic ideas understandable to general audiences. Professor Wolff, welcome back to Indian Global Left.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here.
I wanted to start with your thoughts on the recent elections, the local elections in the United States. Zohran Mamdani's election in the New York City got a lot of attention, but there were also elections in the state of New Jersey, Virginia, and California. Some of those elections were fought on economic issues like rising cost of living, childcare, etc. So if you could tell us your take on what does it reflect on the state of the U.S. economy and how people in the United States feel about politics and economy in general.
Okay, I'd be glad to try to give a excuse me overview of what has happened. By far, the most stunning, unexpected, and significant historical event was the election of Zohran Mamdani here in New York City, where I am speaking to you from New York City. Uh, it still has not really sunk in here in the city to the people. Everyone is discussing it. Here is an unthinkable thought. A Muslim socialist who accepts both of those labels and does not run away from them at all, but in fact emphasizes both of them. Uh, he won the election for mayor with more than 50% of the vote, which means he got more votes than all the other candidates combined. Uh, this means that the standard bearer of the Democratic Party and the standard bearer of the Republican Party, the nominal ones, the ones who had been the leaders right up until the election, were both defeated, and defeated overwhelmingly by an enormous margin, very unusual in New York City politics. Okay, what does that mean before I get to the other elections and so forth? It means that we are now in year number 10 of the return of socialism to American political life. For most of the period since the end of World War II, to be a socialist and to run for office in the United States was to commit political suicide. The United States was different throughout this period from every country in Europe where you could and you did run socialist, communist, and other kinds of anti capitalist political movements and political parties. Those were not possible in the United States. The combination of governmental repression and repression in all the major institutions, the mass media, the religious community, the academic community, the business community. You could not go anywhere if you were identified as a socialist or a communist or a Marxist or an anarchist and so on. Indeed, those words that I just listed were dealt with in the United States as synonyms, as no difference between them. They are all the same evil, bad, foreign thing. So this is an enormous change. It begins 10 years ago with the decision of Bernie Sanders, the lone socialist in the odd and unusual state of Vermont, to stay with that name and to run for office and to do much better than any pundit, anyone had thought he could, myself included, given our history. And he ran a second time and he did even better. And then we had a young group of three or four, mostly women socialists, running and winning elections, the most well known, Alexandra Ocasio Cortez. But those steps on the road have now been capped by this extraordinary and more powerful symbol of the return of socialism. And I say the word return because before World War II, socialism was common in the United States. Many mayors of many cities were socialists. Many people in the state legislatures were socialists. A few were communists. This was not this. The way it was after World War II was an important break. It was the reaction of the capitalist class in the United States, the class of employers, to what had happened. The Great Depression of the 1930s had produced an explosion of membership in two socialist parties, one communist party, and a labor movement with more life in it than we had ever seen before in American history or that we have ever seen since. And this combination, because they worked together, was called the New Deal Coalition. And it achieved the Social Security system, which we had never had before. It achieved an unemployment compensation system, which we had never had before. It achieved the first minimum wage, which we had never had before. And it employed 15 million of the unemployed, which was a government employment program we have never had before and we have never had since. It was the rise of a left wing in America reacting to the Great Depression of the 1930s that terrified the business class. Why? Because the unemployment compensation and the 15 million people hired, the money to pay for all of that, which was enormous, was taxing corporations and the rich. That's what Mr. Roosevelt did under the pressure of the socialist and communist parties and the labor movement. The result was when the war was over, 1945, the president who did all these things, Franklin Roosevelt, died in the same year, and the business community decided this has got to be undone. The New Deal has, and that's the last 60, 70 years of American domestic economic development has been to reverse, to go backwards if possible to before. And Mr. Trump, like Reagan and so forth before him, are simply steps along that process. That's why the rise now again, the return of socialism, capped by Mamdani's win, is a sign of the weakening of the business agenda, the rise of the left in America, and the end of the empire and a moment of historical change. And that's the biggest message I want to leave with you because, given the importance of the United States in the world economy, what I've just described will impact everybody in the world, sooner or later, one way or the other. All right, having said that, Mr. Mamdani's socialism is a very moderate kind of socialism. Think in terms of Northern Europe or something like that. It is leaving the corporations privately owned and operated, leaving the structure employer employee unquestioned, unshaken, but giving the government the role and the power to regulate and control in a way that now will be the great question of the immediate future. How much control will Mamdani be able to impose with a mandate as strong as the one he has, with the support in the city which is kind of remarkable. I'll give you just one example. When Mamdani was asked what would he do if the leader of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, were to visit New York City, he answered, "I will arrest him." You know, New York City is the home of more Jewish people than any other city in the United States by a lot. I believe there may be more Jewish people in New York than in Israel. I'm not sure, but it's a huge community. And that community voted for Mamdani also. It's very important to understand that this is a sign, more than of anything else, it is a sign of an enormous level of dissatisfaction and disaffection of the mass of the people from the entire conventional political community. The Republican leadership, the Democratic leadership, it is though the people are saying, we want none of you. We want something new. We want something different. And if it's new and different, we will vote for it. To have a man stand up who says, I'm a practicing Muslim and I'm a socialist and I believe in those things, to win an election it is extraordinary. I mean, you have to have lived in this country, as I have all my life, to realize what a shift this is. And let me assure you, all of the richest people in New York City, including quite a few billionaires, poured money to defeat him, and they failed. They outspent him 6 or 7 to 1 for every dollar he got. But he got a lot of money because lots and lots of people giving $10 or $20 was able to give him the chance, which is very unusual also in American politics. And it terrifies now the ruling class because the money that used to give them control isn't working very well. Now, as to what Mamdani will do, I don't know. There is a long history of municipal socialism here in the United States. There is an even bigger one outside of the United States. There are all kinds of experiences he can draw from of things that work, things that don't work. Uh, he's a very, very accomplished young man. I do not know him personally, but I am very familiar with the work of his father, Mahmoud Mamdani, and that is one of the great minds of our time. And his mother is a film director in Hollywood, also very well known. These are highly developed people, and he is a very, very smart and alert young man. And so much is expected of him from all sides. But beyond that, let me turn a little bit to the other elections. Every major candidate that was endorsed by Donald Trump lost. Every candidate that was bitterly opposed by Mr. Trump won. So it is a very strong message that Mr. Trump has very big problems. He has alienated uh, a, a, a large enough part of the population that the election next November, a year from now, is already in question, that he may lose control of the Congress by that election. And he is becoming more desperate by the day. Literally, you can see it. Right now in Washington, I don't know if you want to discuss this, he is getting into trouble around a sexual scandal with many of the top officials in his government, the Epstein case, if you follow that. But it's less the case itself that is causing him the trouble. It's the fact that he's now a weakened leader and everybody knows it because it's in everybody's headline every morning. So he's desperate. He's doing desperate economic things. I'll give you just two examples. The press this morning was full of almost humorous stories in which it is reported and confirmed that the Swiss government, Switzerland, had been in long negotiations over the tariff, which was 39%, and that was going to hurt their chocolate business and their watch business and the other things that Switzerland does. And they've been negotiating, the leader of Switzerland with Trump, for months to reduce this. And they couldn't do it. Then a week or two ago, a group of Swiss business leaders, not the politicians, the business leaders visited Mr. Trump and they gave him several gifts, including a gold bar worth $130,000, among other gifts. And he lowered the tariff from 39% to 15%. Okay, there's a word for that in the English language. It's called bribery. This is a bribery. It's out in the open, which is the way bribery doesn't usually happen. But however glad we are that it's in the open, one has to scratch one's head and wonder that he says it, that he makes it public. It's extraordinary. He's so disconnected from his own vulnerability as a leader. And the second thing is, he has seriously proposed, despite the demand of the bankers of America that he stop borrowing. The United States government is so deeply in debt. You know, Professor Patnaik and I have discussed that with you, that every president has to at least appear to be doing something about the debt. Instead, he has proposed to give every citizen of the United States a check early next year for $2,000 as a gift of the government. In other words, he's trying to buy next year's election. All right, these are acts of extraordinary desperation, and they should be understood that way. The elections in New Jersey and Virginia, two very important states in this country by population, by the industry, by the whole culture of the country, were won by Democratic Party women, not socialists, nowhere near socialists. This is the conventional Democratic Party. The importance of it is that Trump worked against them and it didn't help him, and that they are committed to be anti Trump leaders in those two states, which means that he will have a very hard time winning them next year, if not impossible for him. But there were others. Several judges in the state of Pennsylvania were reelected despite Trump's effort to get them out. In California, the likely candidate of the Democrats against Mr. Trump for the presidency, Gavin Newsom, was able to win an agreement to reschedule, to redistrict the state of California to give more Democrats a chance to sit in the Congress, to do for the Democratic Party what, for example, the governor of Texas is already doing for the Republican Party. That's the political corruption that is getting worse and worse. The country is polarized between the Republicans and the Democrats at the same time that the new socialism is emerging. So, if I had to summarize, I would say the broad political shift is way back toward the left and away from the extreme right that Trump represents. But within the Democratic Party, there's a whole nother shift from the middle to the left. And the Democratic Party is going to be the scene of enormous struggles. They are already underway as I speak to you, in which it will be determined whether they stay to be the party of Clinton and Obama and Biden and all of that, or move to the left with Mamdani and Bernie and Ocasio Cortez. And that is going to be kind of a double shift from Republican to Democrat, and within the Democrat, from the middle to something to the left. And finally, people should be aware the first return of socialism is not surprisingly a very moderate, very cautious, very hesitant socialism. But I can assure you, if you're wondering, that behind Mr. Mamdani and all around him are people whose notion of socialism goes well beyond what he has spoken about so far. And as he emerges and as socialism returns to the political life, those other, mostly more radical tendencies within socialism, Marxism, and so forth will also emerge here in the United States. I know that, I'm part of that myself. And so I can assure you that's all also growing very rapidly here in the United States at this point.
Talking about the return of socialism, as you spoke, I it reminded me of Ben Davis in the New York City. He was the councilman from Harlem between, I guess, 1943 and 49. He defended the Scottsboro Boys, and he was a member of the Communist Party. Comes from the radical black tradition. And Professor Gerald Horne, who has been on the show, has written a book on him describing this massive coalition or link, if you like, between the communist tradition in the United States and the black tradition. So a lot of people forget, or there is a lot of amnesia about the New York city's tradition with socialism. And I'm not surprised you use the word carefully about the word return. Just a I wonder if you want to say something, but I wanted to also.
Yes,
Yes, go on, go on.
I want to underscore the importance of three people. Benjamin Davis, whom you mentioned. Uh, what does he prove? He proves that at a time when Jim Crow, the anti-black mentality and practices, and the what we sometimes call structural racism of this country was broken. Benjamin Davis was a black communist. It was as startling an idea that he could win as it is today that Zohran Mamdani can win, right? He won. He won repeatedly. He was extremely popular. It was a time people might be interested to know when you had proportional representation. And so, if the Communist Party got a certain number of votes, they got a seat on the city council, and they put him there. What a statement of the Communist Party of its view about the racial conflicts. The party was way ahead of the rest of this country in opposing segregation, imposing Jim Crow, and nothing proved it more than they're putting a black man in that position. But he was doing it in Harlem, a section in the northern part of Manhattan, the central island of the city of New York, which had also been represented by an Italian American named Vito Marcantonio, who in his way was just as important a symbol, who mobilized an Italian ethnic Catholic population, working class, and who was also openly socialist, Marxist, whatever, and is remembered to this day. And the mayor who overlapped these guys was a man named Fiorello LaGuardia. Now, we have two airports here. One is called Kennedy Airport. The other one is called LaGuardia Airport after him. And he was a friendly supporter of Davis, of Mark Antonio. I mean, the left in New York City was very, very strong. And so, yes, it's very important to see this as a return. The United States, it used to be said by people who wanted you to believe it, was somehow the future. the future when there would be no socialism. Unlike Europe, which could never, even with Hitler and Mussolini, couldn't get rid of the socialists, that somehow the United States had found the magic way to do it. It didn't. It was able for a while to press it down. But socialism, as the history books teach us, or they should, is the product of capitalism. It is capitalism's self critique. And nothing assures the future of socialism any more than the future of capitalism. It's when they both disappear that capitalism will be over, and that's when socialism will have done its job. But in any case, right now, the mood here in the United States is radically changed, as it often is, by one event that turns out to be, the last in a series. You think it's the last thing that made the change. It's the whole series, but we were depressed, the left in America, badly depressed by recent years, by 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 Trump number one, then by the catastrophe of Mr. Biden, the horrible election of Kamala Harris, and so forth. So this victory by Mamdani and the turning away from Trump and the evident continuing decline of the American empire, these are come together with this election of Mamdani that really has changed, for the moment anyway, the mood. However, that evolves right now, this is a remarkable time here in the United States, and it's very important for our friends and allies around the world to be aware of this.
I also wanted to ask you a little bit about how you see some of the challenges that Mamdani would face going forward, or broadly speaking, the US socialist movements would face going forward. We had Professor Norman Finkelstein recently to discuss about the election in New York, and he flagged a couple of issues. The first was Mamdani's decision to reappoint Jessica Tisch. I think it was before he was elected as a mayor. He said that he might reappoint Jessica Tisch as the NYPD chief, and she's obviously a handpicked maiden of the billionaire class. And Professor Finkelstein said this is quite startling given how much Palestine was central to Mamdani's campaign, and the NYPD being central to the attack on the universities and other places of mobilization in solidarity with the Palestinian movement. The other issue is also freezing of rent, and we all know that at the last instance, when you take decisions like freezing of rent, the landlord class and the companies, the huge real estate companies, would call on the police to evict the tenants, and there would be a physical clash. And if the police doesn't stand by you, all those things are actually they don't become substantive. And finally, I want to raise the question of the Democratic Party itself, given we from the Marxist tradition know that there needs to be a party, a central organizing body for socialist movements or other labor movements and all other movements to come together as a defense against corporate and other class interests. Given these huge challenges, and ultimately New York became the capital of global capitalism, as it is said, I wonder, as a Marxist thinker, what are some of the challenges you think that lie ahead of the US socialist struggles?
Well, I think you've pointed to most of them. I could add to a few more, but I think the central point is that the ruling class will do everything in its power to nullify this election. They did everything they could think of to prevent it. And so the next stage of the struggle, and this has always been true, is if you lose this part of the battle, you go on to the next. It's a war. It's not a battle that is ended the war. It's a battle early on, I would guess, in this war. The question then becomes whether the obstacles, such as those you've mentioned, the the for example, the real estate major landlords in the city, were among the major donors to the campaign of Cuomo against. Uh, Cuomo was the major counter candidate to Mamdani. So they're going to continue their fight. They're very worried. The mayor does have power. Um, Reducing rents is one thing. Freezing them is well within his capacity to do, and they know it. And they have spent a lot of money on previous mayors, publicly and bribery under the table, to make him make the decisions that make them wealthy. They're not going to stop. They're going to have to do something now to block him. So then the same will happen with the official Democratic Party. We have an election for the governor of the state of New York. The city of New York is part of the state of New York, and the governor there did endorse Mamdani, whereas other leaders of the Democratic Party did not. She did, and that's because everybody understands that's because she's very worried. She's not she's not so sure about being reelected. And if she were to alienate Mr. Mamdani and he were to turn the city of New York against her, she's finished. So now there's some room for him and her to work something out, which is what I suspect he's going to do. This is the kind of maneuver that you get into if you're going to return socialism to the political. If he is blocked by in many ways, either the landlords can block him, or this governor will somehow block him, or the senator Schumer, who was not his friend, never endorsed him, right to the end. Uh, these people are now having to worry about their own political futures in a changed New York, in a changed political center of the Democratic Party. But if they block him, he will have to make a decision. And here's where your point is crucial. Will he struggle against them while remaining inside the Democratic Party, or will he decide, with all the others involved in these discussions, that the time has come to try the other way, either because it looks like a better chance or because staying in the party is the end of what he has tried to start? That's going to be a very difficult moment. I don't think it's going to happen right away. I think he is going to try to get at least some of the things he wants to get through because it will strengthen him in his popularity. It will make it virtually impossible to beat him. And so he can stay for a while in that job, which will be itself help to get things done. And he'll have more political influence. So he will be torn. Here's something also to keep in mind: the change in mood, which is hard, to give specifics to, but is as important as everything else, will now produce a very tangible. It's that fuzzy line in Marxist philosophy between material and ideal. It's why people like Althusser and others wanted to say the ideal is material and so forth. Here's an example of the idea, an, a change in ways of thinking. My God, socialism can succeed here. Socialism has a place here. The mass of New Yorkers, having had 75 years of unrelenting propaganda against socialism, the majority of the voters voted for it. They're not frightened by it anymore. The label doesn't drive you away. None of it. Now that I'm going to give you one example that I'm personally involved in. Leaders of municipal organizations are now thinking of doing things they never thought of before. The example I'm going to give you: we have a spectacular opera. sustained by the richest billionaires. It's called the Metropolitan Opera. It's right in the middle of Manhattan. And, if you go there in the evening, people arrive all dressed up. And, it's a rich people's playground, this opera. And the way it survives is it gets lots of gifts from wealthy people who can have their name put on the seat so you know who gave the money. Disgusting, but the way rich people work. Okay. And the seats, if you want to buy a seat to have to go to the opera, cost hundreds of dollars per seat. So if you're a family of four, this is a major expenditure which the vast majority of people in New York City cannot afford. Okay. For Italian people, and that's an enormous, Italian Americans is an enormous ethnic group in New York City. Opera is there in the invention that was invented in Italy. It is the common property of the Italian people at all classes. They can't afford to go. All right. I was asked recently by someone if the following could be arranged. This is by someone involved at the opera who's excited about Mamdani. Here's what he told me. He said, I would like to set aside one opera every week or every month where the ticket is $2 and it be only available to people who cannot afford this. We'll figure out some way to do this. Maybe churches, maybe civic associations will be given tickets, and suddenly people who can come up with $2, which everybody can, will be able to go to the opera, which they have never done before. Right? If this person were to sit down with Mr. Mamdani and work this out as a governmental initiative to bring to the people something denied to them. And now you multiply this by one a month or two a month of these kinds of events, he will be the mayor for the rest of his life. He'll have the stature of a LaGuardia, and we will have a Mamdani airport one day here in New York. And these are not his ideas. These are the ideas coming out of a community that thinks it can now imagine doing things utterly out of the atmosphere until this point.
And that's just a great point for those of us who have followed labor history across the world, because if you read labor history, you know that labor neighborhoods, not just the shop floor, I'm including neighborhood. There is actually a great book about Indian labor movement in Bombay by someone, great labor historian called Rajnaran Chandravarkar. His argument was that the labor movement was not limited to a shop floor. In fact, he would say it is primarily not a shop floor thing, it's a neighborhood thing. And there his contribution was to show how Indian opera called Tamasha in Bombay, for instance, these are Ganpati festivals, these were religious festivals, these were organized for and by the working people themselves, and that meant that they had such a huge grip, labor had such a huge grip on the city of Bombay. And this was prior to the mill villages were destroyed, and Bombay, like New York, was turned into a financial city. So what I'm saying is that this kind of rejuvenation of cultural spaces can be tremendous places for also rejuvenation and organization of working class politics.
Absolutely. And if Mr. Mamdani is smart, which I know he is, but if he's politically sensitive, he will understand what you just said. And by that, to give you another reason why your idea is so powerful, because of the name socialist and because of the American media, they really don't understand what the word means. They really, what is socialism? What comes out of their mouths is a jumble of confusion in which elements of the Soviet Union and China and Cuba mingle together with horrific images. One of the things that will make Mamdani strong is if he just does good, common sense, useful things in the community, which he can do, because people don't associate that with socialism. If he, for example, if he really puts the city behind neighborhood based festivals here in New York City, which is a very neighborhood area. I live in a neighborhood called the Lower East Side, very famous original place where immigrants settled. I live, I'm talking to you from there right now. This is a neighborhood. It thinks of itself as a neighborhood. If the mayor initiated, together with some local politicians, who will work with him, no question, even though they're not socialists, he will make himself, and thereby the label socialism, have a meaning for the people here, which the ruling class cannot undo and cannot overwhelm. No matter what they do, they don't know how to do it. They don't have the means. They don't have the standing. He does. He could do that, and that might make it possible. I'm reminded of the stories I heard about the city of Bologna in northern Italy. For many, many decades during the Cold War, the Italian Communist Party dominated the city of Bologna in the north. No matter who ran Italy, the communists were reelected every time. Why? They were not corrupt. They did not do what was so common in other Italian cities. And they made it very clear that doesn't happen here. And if anyone did such a thing, the party immediately expelled that. Very important kind of demonstration to the people the government is not for sale. And then they did all these public services and all these festivals. And it made easy for people to listen to them about political things. It's how you go about it is a very, very important issue. And up until now, because it was repressed, you couldn't have these practical conversations. Now, the practical becomes almost too important. You don't want to now the issue is look at all the practical things we can do, but you have to remember you're in a fight against a system, not just against a political party or this politician or that one. The issue for the democratic socialists in America is capitalism. They have to now remember that because they have the chance to be practically successful. And they're going to be very tempted to do that. And they're right to be tempted. They must do that. The trick will be how to handle if they're blocked from doing it, and then how to hold on to the larger issue of capitalism. And of course, and now I'm speaking just for me, the logical need here is for your own political party, not for an endless battle inside a party whose leadership is more opposed to you than to the Republicans they do battle with in our normal politics.
Clara Mattei, who you know so well, her
Yes.
book talks about northern Italy and its working class tradition that built the Communist Party and how strong that party was in the during the First World War, but it runs up to through the 1920s before it was destroyed by the fascist movements, or maybe weakened. I don't know how you would like to say it. I just a side comment before I want to ask you one final question about the gold bar. The Tim Cook set a precedent about gifting gold bars, so maybe we should be a little bit soft on the Swiss business class, given the Trump didn't like their political leader. I mean, apparently Bloomberg and others says that there was a phone call with the leadership, and that turned into this 39% tariff suddenly. day. And yes, the business class then led the talks, and now it is down to 15%. So they would be sending a not just chocolates, but also Switzerland is a huge gold refinery hub. So gold bar is not a surprise. But in either case, Swiss economists are saying that all this 200 billion investment is just it's a fraud, because the political class has no way to force Swiss business class to invest in other places. So maybe better the business class led those negotiations or whatever. But I want to come to a more substantive point in the final segment, which I think has been everywhere in the mainstream but hasn't been framed in the way I want to frame it, which was the recent US-China talk at Busan in the city of South Korea. And the mainstream framing has been it's a US-China talk, but from the perspective of the Global South, which we have been discussing with you and Professor Patnaik have been doing, a lot of us are saying that it's a historic moment, given this is the first time, perhaps, in the recent industrial history of nations where a Global South country or a non-Euro-American country has inflicted a material economic defeat on a economic superpower from the north. To that extent, given the mainstream media now openly says that it's an American defeat, I wonder, how do you look at the significance of this event? Because it does talk about something that you have been talking about, which is the decline of the US empire. So if we are serious about a genuine equality among nation states, genuine equality and rise of the Global South, we have to celebrate the decline of the US empire. And this event, I think, does reflect something along that direction. So I am curious about what your thoughts are on that event.
Well, I think I agree with you that it is another step in a whole series of steps that I would say signal the decline of one empire and the rise either of another empire or of a genuinely multinational, what shall I call it, ruling of the world under a new system. I'm, of course, a partisan of the latter. I do not want to see another empire replace it. I'm not happy with the sequence of empires, not the British, not the American, and not all the others from before in Asia, in Europe, and anywhere. Uh, and I do think that meeting is another one of these steps. But I would say to you, I see it less uniquely that step. In other words, a lot of the conversation that happened at that meeting has had been had before in bits and pieces at other meetings in the genuine ongoing. The United States is learning slowly, painfully, because it doesn't want to, and with much denial going on, that it cannot command other people. It does not have the means to do this anymore. It can't take away the US market, whether it be by tariffs or some other way, when China, for example, has the BRICS. The BRICS is the alternative. China can sell to them. They won't sell to the United States. Will it be difficult? Yes. Will it occasion some losses? Probably. Yeah. But it isn't an existential threat. And that's what the United States, thrives on. It has been able to say, we, for whom it means relatively little, can impose on you something that means enormous. Look at what's going on with Venezuela, or look how they try to deal with Iran, or look at the explosion where he threatens to deal with Canada or Mexico or Nigeria, all of which, or Panama or Greenland. I mean, it's constantly the juxtaposition of an all powerful with a, by comparison, powerless. But China isn't powerless. China has done what nobody, I don't take away from other countries that have made enormous gains, especially India, but China is this new thing for the United States. And then the alliance with Russia and India makes this new thing that much more enormous. They can't cope. Let me use the fact that I'm an American, that I went to all the elite universities here. I know many of these people personally. And I have, just because we were friends in school and so on, I can talk to them and I can get from them what I suspect, and I can see whether it's correct or not. they are they're at their wits end. They don't know what to do. They can't control what's going on. The gap between the wealth of China and the BRICS on the one hand, just measure it by GDP, and the United States and the G7 on the other hand, the gap gets wider with every week, with every month. They crossed the line in 2020. They were roughly equal, and China and the BRICS has surged ahead. It never stops, no matter what the United States has done in the years since 20, with a pandemic, without a pandemic. It doesn't matter. That is impressing the American leadership with, I'll quote you now, it's historic. This isn't anymore this policy, that policy, this situation. Too many situations that all look alike. The decline here, the rise over there. At some point, and it may be sooner than we all understand, and maybe it is even foretold in some way by Mamdani's victory. You're going to see, it's a prediction I make, and I don't believe in predictions, so it's just my guessing. You're going to see a political movement developing here in the United States, which is going to appeal to the American people with something like the following argument: we are on a collision course with China, and that is more dangerous than sitting down with China to work out some way to live and let live. The United States G7 will have something, and China and the rest of the world, the global South, will have, and not because we're generous and not because we have noble plan. It's because the alternative, at a certain point, when your ship is sinking, you begin to realize we have to have a new plan here, because the one of dominating, of isolating, it's not working. The tariff program is teaching everyone to isolate the United States as the rogue nation. It's the ultimate joke. After World War II, the United States policy: contain communism, contain the Soviet Union. The irony is that policy, which worked pretty well to do that, has now broadened out, and its victim is the United States itself.
Now, even Trump is rolling back some of his tariffs on
Yes,
duties on beef, bananas, tomatoes, coconut, and I think he gets
yes.
a clear
Well,
signal.
my guess is he's collecting gold bars somewhere and piling them in his closet and has to give them in return. He's also terrified. You should be aware. The Supreme Court is expected to issue a ruling, and none of us know what that ruling will be, but it is considering whether the tariffs, as applied by
Mhm.
Mr. Trump, are constitutional or not. It's quite clear from most of the constitutional lawyers that I know that it is not. And there is, according to them, a serious chance that the United States Supreme Court will declare them unconstitutional, and then nobody knows what happens. Do they all get canceled? Does he have to give money back to people? I mean, it is a mess beyond all others. And let me leave you with another final thought about that. So many things are going wrong for Mr. Trump now. whether it's tariffs or dealings with China, or his failure to stop the war in Ukraine, or his closeness to Netanyahu, and I could go on, that a new possibility exists in the midst of American politics, which is that the people who put Mr. Trump in office are now going to push him out because he's too disruptive, too controversial. The country is splitting into very hostile. Socialism is returning. They're going to blame him for everything. And then they're going to get rid of him in the hopes that maybe that, removing him, who is the focus of so much foreign and domestic trouble, will solve. It will not solve the problem. It will not change the decline, but it is the kind of move that ruling classes in these situations sometimes take.
Absolutely. One final comment, very brief. I think you made this important point that at some point in time, there will be enough change within the US domestic politics that would convince most Americans that a coexistence with China would be a better strategy
Right.
for everyone than colliding with it. And I just want to add that the first third of our discussion, where we spoke or discussed about possibility of radical left politics in the United States, I think the more it succeeds in the US, the better it is for the rest of the global South to hold back the empire. I mean, I know the US left has its own blind spots. I mean, a lot of the left, the kind of things they are still talking about Venezuela at the time when the US military assets are amassing them, it's just revolting. But nevertheless, I think somewhat better people in the imperial core are always better for the rest of us in the global South, because at least there is a semblance of sanity and you can make these discussions about what is fair, what is unfair. So I think I wanted to link up the two segments that we discussed today, the external segment and the internal segment, and they are both linked, I guess. Your closing comments.
Yes, the only disagreement I might have is we have still a long way to go to make what you just said conscious, to make it explicit, to talk about how and why the interests motivating a return of socialism to our politics have an international analog. So far, they are all about rents
Right.
and food deserts and free bus rides, and all of that is fine. But it is devoid so far of any serious engagement with getting beyond capitalism and what in fact that means, and how we connect to this growing clash between the United States and China. Those issues will intrude and they will force socialists like Mamdani to deal with them too. And then again, that raises the organizational question of a political party that can bring these things organically together.
We will leave it there, Professor Wolff. This was actually a very, very interesting conversation. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, and I look forward to talking with you and Professor Patnaik
Absolutely.
again in the near future.
Take care. Have a wonderful rest of the day ahead. Bye.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.